Hello again. So what I want to get into now is I want to start off with an example, but this is going to lead into us talking about relationship sets. All right, so let's have our example here. You are designing a new app. We're going to make lots of apps. They're going to be web apps in general. Now each user has a non-unique name and a list of interests. These are things they like to do, for example. Now we've learned through talking, or we know that users, so the users of the app, so users want to be able to search for other users based on interests. For example, they might express this to be, find me all users who like hiking. And they may very well actually like to be able to, let me put it this way. I'm just going to go ahead and extend this, and say users will want to be able to browse a list of interests. So when we figure out how we're going to build applications, we get ourselves, we talk to people, we talk about what the application's going to need to be able to do, and so forth and so on. Yeah, so this is a real simple explanation of this app. It's going to be a very simple app because this is an example given on a whiteboard. But this is also the sort of thing that you might see me put together on a homework problem for you, put together on a test, something like this. You're going to notice some things. You're like, what a clue he gives. He says, non-unique name. Well, that's a real, wow. I know I'm not going to be able to use the name by itself as a primary key, for example. Interests, each user and a list of interests. So the users have more than one interest often, or can have more than one interest. This tells us about the type of queries that we're going to need to be able to form to run our application. They're going to be some sort of query here where they're going to want to join with regard to the users and their interests. Here they just want to be able to examine the interests on their own, maybe so that they could select some interests and then run a query to find people with those interests, for example. So this is sort of the problem formulation, but it is representative of the type of thing that you yourself as a product designer would be coming up with as you either envision the product or you are talking with potential future users. Oh, I would like to be able to do the following. And you're taking notes. We'll talk, a lot of that more happens in MSCI 342 with the software engineering, where you determine what these requirements are and what the usage things are. Right now in 245, we're spending our time on learning how to, given that sort of knowledge, how do we build it? Okay, so we'll focus in the next course on how to obtain that information and then build things. So step one with regard to this, solving this sort of problem. So when I say step one, I'm getting at how are we going to go about building our entity relationship diagram? What is it that we're going to do to model this data for our database? Well, the first step always is identify the entity sets in the problem. Okay, what are the entities that we're dealing with here? So you might go initially thinking, so this might be idea number one. You might say, yeah, I know I have users as an entity. So why don't I try something like this? So I'm going to say users, and then I'm going to write their name and their interest. I remember those things from the problem. And then, we're going to say, well, so I've got this is my main thing. I've got my attributes that describe it. I'm doing okay as far as this head first SQL goes. And then I think, well, do I have a primary key? So do I have a primary key here? And the answer is no. Names are not unique, and it could be possible that someone could have the same interests as someone else. And so I go no, and then that leads me to idea two for my design. I still know I know users as an entity, so that's I'm good with that. So I've got my users, and yep, I fall and I say yep, so absolutely I'm gonna have an ID, a unique auto-generated integer. That's what I'm gonna create there. And then I could say, yeah, and then they have their name and interest. So great. I'm so happy that I've solved my primary key. Oh, wait a minute. Are my attributes atomic? Oh, and of course they aren't, because interests, there's more than one. It's like a list or a set. So that's a no-go. So then you go, well, so no. So interests is not an attribute of a user. It's not something that describes a user. Interests are a thing of themselves. They are an entity of themselves. And we think about that also. Notice that in the problem description I gave, which was, and users would like to be able to browse a list of interests. Well, that's like they view it as a thing in of itself. Okay, so users have interests, but interests are, it's like, yeah, I could have lots of bicycles. I could be an owner of many different vehicles. That, doesn't mean I make a list of them. They're not describing who I am. They still could be a separate thing, and we just need to say which ones I own. We need to set up something between myself and these other things. And so the answer here is that interests need to be an entity themselves. All right, so the interests need to be an entity set. So we're gonna erase, start over. Now we're on to our third idea for the design. Well, we've realized that we actually have two separate entities in this system that we need to build for. We have our users, we're gonna have that ID and a name, okay. And then we're going to have interests. And an interest can have a name. Now we do the same thing. It's like, well, do I have a primary key? And you know what? I think on my interests that it doesn't make sense to get for like there to be two separate interests that are both named hiking, or two separate interests both named, cooking. Okay, so my name, I think, is actually a unique thing that can identify what an interest is. And so by name, the name itself is a good primary key for this table. No need for anything else. All done there. All right, is it atomic? Well, that was the whole point. I made this table so that each row will have a different interest name. I'm not going to break up and have sub-interests within a interest. An interest is just itself. It already is as small as I can envision it to be. So yes, I've got my atomic, I've got my primary key. Great. Now I got two entities. What do I do now? So basically, to get around this is basically we need to define a relationship between these two entities. Because again, the users have interests. Okay, so we need to express that somehow, and that's through a relationship set. So I'll write this out now. To say what interests a user has, we need to define an association between users and interests. This is what we call a relationship. Okay, so we have entities or entity sets. So this is an entity set. Interest is an entity set. And we're going to form a relationship between the two, which will be a relationship set, actually. And so what we'll need to do is we need to have up some sort of name for this. We'll try to pick a good name that would describe the relationship. For me, I don't know. I had difficulty coming up with a good name. So this is not the best, but it's the best I could do at the moment, which was I'll call the relationship interested. You probably could come up with something better. And what we do is we draw our relationships in a diamond. All right. So we've got this interested, and then we connect with lines from the diamond to the entities that are related to each other, that are associated. All right. So this thing here, this is our relationship set. Again, that's interest is an entity set and users is an entity set. But you should know that that relationship sets will often become tables too. So entity sets, absolutely, we're making tables out of these things. Students are sometimes confused because we draw a diamond here, and they're like, but tables are these rectangular things. Don't get yourself confused about this. This is, we're in the first stages. We're not necessarily done. We're in the first stages of creating an entity relationship diagram, which represents the conceptual nature of the data that we're going to be having in our database. We will later learn how to take an entity relationship diagram and turn it into a set of tables, a schema in the database. Often we will find that our relationship set becomes a table in that process. Sometimes it will not. So that's there's a little bit of confusion. Oh, wait a minute. This time we didn't end up with a table for the relationship set. This time we did. Trust me, there's really nice specific rules that we'll follow. So we'll just eventually learn those rules, but don't think, oh, rectangle, tables, triangles, no. Triangles often, these diamonds often it's not a triangle, that's a diamond. These diamonds often do also become tables. All right. Now, So that's my first example for relationship sets. And you wait a second, you might be like, don't I need to do more? How do I query this? Again, we're not to the querying stage. We're not to designing the schema. We are representing the data. And so we've got users who are related, have an association with interests, and we call that relationship that they're interested. All right? All right. Now, sometimes a relationship has an attribute or attributes, if there's more than one, of course, that describes it. So it's not just that the relationship ties together these entities, but there's something about the nature of that relationship that needs to be described between the two of them. And it could be then different between, you could have one user and they're related to, there could be things that we need to talk about the relationship. And you could even imagine, like we talk about, if you remember graphs and networks, and we've got nodes and edges. Well, you could have edges between the nodes, but you could also have weighted edges. That weight is something that needs to be described, needs to be recorded between the relationship, which is represented by the edge between the nodes. But anyways, the relationships often, you could even be, between friends or between acquaintances. Oh, I have a loving relationship. I hate that person. Well, we might want to describe the fact that, oh, this relationship between these two people is a loving relationship, and the relationship between these two is a hateful one. The relationship is still, connected between the two, but we describe it in some way. So there's absolutely the possibility that we could have some attributes. So we'll go with another example. I hate it when my pen's dry. So consider the following. This is going to seem really familiar based upon our book ratings, but this is where we're headed. You are designing a new app. That allows users to rate books. All right, again, each user has a non-unique name. And each book has a title and author. Ratings are a single integer value. And I could explain again, 5 is I love it, -5 is I hate it, and so forth and so on, but I won't get into that right now. All right, time to make our entity relationship diagram. So first step, always 1, identify entity sets. Then we've already also learned step 2, which is identify relationships between those entity sets. So again, we're faced with a design problem. What are our entities? Let's make those. Let's figure them out. Their attributes, their primary keys. We're going to draw a bunch of these rectangles. See if that makes sense. All right, we think we have all the entities figured out. Then how are these entities associated with each other? What are their associations? What are their relationships, so to speak? And we're going to draw nice diamonds and lines connecting the entities appropriately. Okay, digging into this problem then. First, we're going to figure out our entities. I'm not going to go through a bunch of ideas. I think we're going to follow what we've seen already in our book ratings database, that we've got an ID as a primary key for the users, and they have a name. Although actually this is a little bit different than the books rating database. Sorry for the confusion. The idea is the same. The design ends up being a little different than what I've given in the schema. But anyway, we got a title, an author. And so yes, I've gone and decided that for books, that when they have a title and an author, that the title may not uniquely identify things, and certainly the author does not uniquely identify things, but together for my database, a title and an author should uniquely identify things. I'm not going to talk about different editions of a book. I just want one book, and so a title and author. I suppose it's possible for there to be the same title and the same author name for two totally different books. But at least in my system, I'm not going to be able to model that. If that was truly the case, I would need to think about something else. Maybe I would need to use something like an ISBN identifier. So, something that is issued by a third party that will uniquely identify a book. But for my sake, I feel like title and author, that's based upon the usage. All right. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute. Is author atomic? It depends on what my usage of my data is. For my use scenario here, absolutely author is going to be an atomic attribute. We don't plan to search by first name, last name. It's just that is the string. There are potentially some issues with this design in that people or I, when I make my database, I might screw up, and I might, for the same author, I might spell or abbreviate names and stuff differently, and that could be a real mess. So that's something to think about. But for the sake of this example, we're going to go with this. This is going to be good enough. Now, we're missing something though. Ratings. So I'm going to ask, so we're going to envision maybe, so the first thing I'm going to say is, well, I'm not quite sure about these ratings. Are ratings an entity? I know I'm not going to stick ratings as an attribute here or an attribute here. That doesn't make any sense. So I know I have to represent the ratings somehow. Are they an entity? So if I was to do ratings as an entity, so I'll make them an entity, ratings, and score. This weirds me out. Like, what in the world, the problem with this, and then, so if they are, so that's like drawing them like an entity, then we need some sort of ternary relationship to connect users, books, ratings. So we need something that somehow connected these three things together. It's like, what? No, it don't feel good. I don't want to deal with ternary relationships. That's like an advanced concept. That bugs me. So I'm going to say, no, that doesn't seem right. It's like Users are related to books via their ratings. So users rate books. That's a relationship. So it's not an entity. At least not for me, it's not going to be. I'm not going to try to design it that way and come up with some other relationship. The ratings themselves are the relationship. I rated this book. Okay, that related me as a user to that book. Okay, so instead, we're going to say, we're going to make some relationship like rated. Okay, and I'm going to connect then users to books via the relationship rated. Whoa, wait a minute. We now need to have an actual rating. We need to describe this relationship based upon, yeah, I gave that book a 5. I gave that book a 1, a -3, whatever. My relationship's not just that I rated it, but I rated it with a value. And so what we do is then we tack on a dashed line and draw a box for the attribute that describes that relationship. So rated has with it associated a rating. Okay. So to spell this out into words on the whiteboard, we have that the rated relationship and then we'll call it a relationship set because we're going to have lots of ratings, by the way. This is going to have lots of ratings relating users to books via their ratings. So it's a set of things. It's a relationship set. Has an attribute rating that describes how a user is related to a book. All right, so our relationship sets are not just always just plain diamonds, but they can have attributes, and they can have more than one attribute, okay? The book can show you examples of how to draw that. I think I would probably just, so my guess is I would just probably have additional, I would make a box bigger and put additional words in it, one word per line or one attribute per line. And so those are the attributes then that go along with that relationship set that describe the relationship between these two entities. All right.